What if we could rebuild the natural abundance of our coasts? What if we could reclaim the livelihoods of the families and communities, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous, who depend on a thriving marine environment? What if we could work together to breathe life into reconciliation in a meaningful way for the well-being of all people who share this coast? Our coast is one of the richest natural environments in one of the richest countries in the world. For thousands of years and countless generations, our coast has sustained us, fed us, and provided livelihoods. It's a place of beauty and of culture, Indigenous and non-Indigenous alike. It makes us who we are. However, we are increasingly concerned about the health of our coast and the communities that depend on it. Here along the Great Bear Sea, First Nations have been focusing on how we can protect and restore the natural abundance that our ancestors spoke of. For the past 2 decades, First Nations have been working with federal and provincial governments and coastal stakeholders in long-term planning to both protect our coast and plan for future abundance. This includes a network of marine protected areas spread across 2/3 of the British Columbia coast. I'm Christine Smith Martin. My Haida name is AdKey. I come from the Yaklonis clan of Haida Gwaii, and I'm the CEO of Coastal First Nations. First Nations have been managing our traditional territories for at least 14,000 years. Over the last decade, our communities have developed comprehensive marine use plans for our traditional territories. In 2006, we created a long-term sustainable conservation model, the landmark Great Bear Rainforest Agreement, a model that is duplicated worldwide in 9 different countries and counting. We now have an opportunity to duplicate the success with a marine protected area network for the Great Bear Sea, for our future generations and for all Canadians.
This takes all hands on deck. What we are trying to do is shift the way we utilize our oceans and we think about them. And that's so necessary today with the challenges that we're facing. The reduction in biodiversity and abundance of life in the oceans affects us in a number of ways, and we collectively as human beings need to shift how we are managing the oceans, and we can only do it together. Collaborative governance is absolutely essential. It's important for our federal government as a key part of our commitment to reconciliation.
We are at a proverbial crossroads with respect to our oceans, with our coastal environment. Is there a way to take the path that leads us to recovery, that leads us back to a place of abundance, rather than managing for scarcity, which has, I think, been our perspective for some time? It's diminishing over time. And the question is, how do you share what's little left? And this might be somewhat controversial, the relinquishing of power from traditional sources. So pre-contact, all the authorities rested with the First Peoples here since time immemorial. Since Canada was colonized, then the power moved away. And I believe that a sustainable solution always incorporates the leveling out and the bringing back of authority, true authority to the rights and title holders, the First Nations, and developing new protocols and ways of sharing, decision-making, guardianship, all of those things that rights and title holders have been asking for a long time.
I'm born and raised here, so everybody here is connected to the coast in some fashion, it seems to me. But I was elected for 15 years in politics, 10 years in government, and was the premier of the province. And of course, now I'm the president and chief operating officer of the Jim Pattison Group, and we're the largest fishing company in British Columbia. I think in a lot of ways we've ignored the coastal environment historically. We've just taken it for granted. As a result, we've got some challenges. Like there's no extra fish to catch. There's no extra gooey duck to harvest. There's no extra. And so anytime you try a new management regime, there's some potential consequences of that for the current license holders and the current people. But beyond that, in small communities up and down the coast, particularly First Nations communities, you know, they have been, in many respects, shut out of the opportunities that have existed because of the way it's been managed. So I think this is an opportunity to really make a big step in terms of trying to figure out a way to better manage our coastal resources. First Nations co-management with the public sector particularly can be really effective, and much more effective than just the government in itself.
I come from the Ugualas family of the Wekino Nation, which is in the land of the Hamatsa in Rivers Inlet, British Columbia, Canada. My English name is Danielle Shaw, and I am the chief counselor for my nation. My traditional name, Abuk, actually means mother, which is a role that I take seriously, not just for my own children, but for my people and for the stewardship of the land and the waters within my territory. The Wekino people are in a very remote part of the central coast of British Columbia. Without a grocery store and community, we need to rely on the territory to feed our people for the most part. We strongly feel that marine protected areas are a tool that can be used to ensure really strong protections and sustainable and responsible management of the resources on the coast.
You know, December 31st, everyone has champagne and celebrates the coming of the new year. Here, amongst my people, the new year doesn't come until all the herring come. We kind of start off with the herring and the herring spawn through March and April. When the herring move in, the halibut come in. May, June, people are collecting seaweed from the outer coast and drying. June, July, and August, and September and October, there's going to be different waves of salmon that are going to come through. The sockeye will be here any day. Chum and pinks and the Chinooks are here now. The winter months, clams is a big food source in the winter. February, the steelhead start coming, so people can get a fresh feed of salmon. Families generally work together and give them out amongst their family, so it's a cycle that we've lived with for thousands of years. The connection to the land and to the animals and to the birds, that really defines our culture, makes up who we are.
All of the kids that grew up in the coastal communities hear from their parents and grandparents is that when the tide is out, the table is set, meaning, you know, once the tide recedes and the shoreline is exposed, there's opportunity to get out and harvest clams, chitons, mussels, our seaweeds, sea scallops. There's so many different little creatures out there that you can harvest and have a good meal from. Traditional knowledge was a huge component to the Haida Gwaii Marine Plan process. When we first engaged in this back in the mid-2000s, community consultation happened through door-to-door visits. Individuals were identified that were frequent harvesters of all species, and we did a lot of one-on-one interviews with a lot of the older Haidas, you know, middle-aged Haidas and young Haidas that identified key areas that are set aside with certain protections that's going to be key for future generations to have the opportunity to get out and harvest what's there set aside for us.
Our primary function is to look after the land, look after the water. In that way we look after the culture.
Okay, now cut right here. Cut that for me.
Why is it seen as usual that we should be able to exploit and wipe out and you know, deplete the oceans. It shouldn't be, like we should be looking after it. Amazing, wonderful place with life forms that deserve to live as much as we do. It's important to have some natural, marine, untouched regions, just to have some kind of refuge for them.
We have always been taught by our ancestors and by our elders that with the right to the territory comes a very large sense of responsibility over not only the care for ourselves and for our people, but also for our bear and wolf and fish and whale ancestors as well. So the needs of the animals and the needs of the habitat are just as important as the needs of the people. With global warming, and then you couple that with the pandemic, we've seen that within our territory, there isn't enough to sustain our little community. As our people went out and they went clam digging and they set prawn traps and they set crab traps and we set nets for fish, we were not getting enough. It means that there is not enough food on the kitchen table for families to sustain themselves today. As we move forward, if something's not done, this is only going to get worse.
Our community would need about 180 pounds of seafood per person per year to sustain themselves. We've spent a ton of time interviewing our people. We probably averaged about 100 meetings a year for about 5 years developing the marine plans. And the same stories came up over and over and over again, that the species were once there, now they're gone. Commercial fishery came in and took it all out.
We live in a world now where everything is changing around us, and we are witnessing significant declines of many species. Salmon, ulican, northern abalone, Dungeness crab, and rockfish, among others.
Developing a network of marine protected areas is extremely important. I don't think you need to be a rocket scientist to know that setting aside protected areas will help repopulate the different species. I think it'll introduce sustainability, and I think hopefully will address some of our food needs, community food needs. So.
The complexity of the decline of our ocean and coastal ecosystems calls for a fundamental change in the way that we manage our ocean. And this change must include a well-designed network of marine protected areas along our coast.
While our oceans face a lot of real challenges, it doesn't change the fact that the marine and coastal regions of northern British Columbia are really among the richest and most productive ecosystems on the planet. The combination of upwelling and ocean currents make these waters super productive and full of nutrients, which are actually the foundation of marine food webs. Because of this, the bioregion has some of the highest numbers of marine seabirds and marine mammals globally, as well as some of the highest coverage of canopy kelp forests on the planet. Then you add the fact that it is next to one of the last remaining intact areas of temperate rainforest, with over 3,900 salmon-bearing streams, unique marine-dependent species of wolves and bears, and tons of nutrients transferring from the forest to the ocean and the ocean to the forest. There really is nowhere else like this on the planet, and that's why creating a network of marine protected areas along our coast is such an important undertaking. Around the world, scientific studies have shown that well-managed marine protected areas can act as safe havens and nurseries for diverse marine life. Inside marine protected areas, fish and invertebrates can grow older and larger than in unprotected areas. And for some species, larger females produce significantly more offspring than smaller females. Then the larvae from marine protected areas can disperse far into fished areas, where after some years, they can recruit into fisheries and build healthy catches. Also, as fish populations increase inside marine protected areas, adults tend to spill over into unprotected areas where they can then be caught and support sustainable fisheries. Marine protected areas can help sustain the diversity and abundance of life in the surrounding waters. And they can play an important role in enhancing the genetic diversity required to adapt to environmental change. Marine protected areas also protect corals, sponges, sediments, and eelgrass beds, all of which are important marine habitats and also work in different ways to store carbon. By protecting these ocean carbon stores from damage, it prevents carbon from being released into the water column where it contributes to ocean warming and acidification. Having multiple marine protected areas in a well-connected and representative network can create cumulative benefits that are greater than the sum of its parts. We can think about the Marine Protected Area Network as a really important tool along with other management and stewardship and restoration efforts that hopefully altogether we can move towards a future where we're building back the abundance to the full potential of this area.
Networks of marine protected areas is an important conservation tool to support resilient ecosystems and to support biodiversity going forward. DFO's science has been focused on compiling and collecting ecological data for the development of MPA networks, along with our partners, including First Nations in the Northern Shelf bioregion. And in particular, ecological data that allows us to identify ecological sensitive habitat, such as biodiversity hotspots. Ultimately, we want to protect and conserve ecosystems for future generations, but also we want to ensure sustainable marine economies, improved food security, and support adaptation and mitigation to climate change.
We're talking about an area that's 102,000 square kilometers. So it's a huge area that encompasses so many different types of species and areas that are really important for biodiversity and for functioning ecosystems, as well as providing services to people. So we're trying to do everything from protecting inlets to nearshore habitats to deep water sponges to areas that are important for spawning and migrating salmon to seabird colonies. I mean, you name it, we have it on the table. We did this in a scientifically rigorous process with multiple input from experts outside of the process as well as within, and identified almost 200 species and 17 different types of areas and habitats that we want to ensure are represented in the Marine Protected Area Network.
And we have over 100 plus data sets that look at socioeconomic values and human uses across the marine environment for the Northern Shelf. There's commercial fishing catch data. There's recreational data for areas of preference or high value. There are data sets for different activities such as aquaculture, log storage and handling, facilities that use the marine environment, areas of importance for public rec activities. There's also vessel traffic data for large shipping activity. Some sectors have a lot of information available, others are much more data poor. And in that case, we are looking to stakeholders to help fill the gaps and augment the data sets that we do have to work with.
So the idea of having a network, having protected areas is, basically that's a good and positive thing, and I'm proud to be a Canadian and be involved in that and all of those good things. At the same time, it's a challenge to go into an area that's been used for many, many years and say, okay, we're now going to change the use and access to this area. It's no small task, and it needs to be very carefully considered. And it seems as though there is the possibility to allow for certain kinds of activity to carry on and to continue. And you may moderate that activity. I'm very happy to be a part of and be involved with and help to shape that. That's a tremendous legacy that those involved in the MPA process will hopefully be able to look back on with a great deal of pride.
We understand these areas are designed to be a network of protection areas for a variety of objectives, ranging from species to ecological and even cultural importance that extends even to reconciliation.
We bring all of the fishermen together to do that work for the partners, for the governments, where first we do is develop a layer by fishery where we take each individual fishery, and there's 24 different fisheries affected in this Northern Shelf bioregion area, and we have them develop their own individual map so it minimizes the impact to their fishery while trying to achieve the ecological and cultural targets that are identified in the MPA network. At the end of the day, there will be negative impacts, and they won't be equal across all 24 fisheries. Some will be hit harder than others. So our collective job is to try to minimize that and maintain as much viability as possible.
Ports like Prince Rupert have been very successful at attracting new and growing traditional trade, and that's been primarily based in containerized traffic, but now branching out into new commodities like liquid propane gas, wood chips to Europe, some very interesting trades. British Columbia is building an export market for liquid natural gas. That brings a whole new commodity and shipping traffic in places perhaps where there wasn't much before. So all of that has to be integrated to what we are learning from the Marine Protected Area Network process, both from an ecological perspective and a cultural and social perspective as well. Having that understanding of the ecosystem in which you operate in is crucial to being able to both plan your operations day to day, but also to plan your fleet operations and innovate into the future. The network of marine protected areas is going to provide the shipping industry with some certainty. The shipping industry is completely supportive of this process, the process today, and however the process evolves over time. So it's 100% committed.
As an operator on the coast, we get to see and experience lots of different places, and marine protected areas are so crucial in terms of protecting and managing the marine environment in a way that supports ecotourism. You know, we're always heartened by a new provincial park or a new national park or a marine protected area, but it's so important for these pieces to be connected. Have somebody looking at the bigger picture and somebody putting together all of the pieces of the puzzle from the economic perspective, the social perspective, and the ecological perspective being the utmost important.
The coast is our lifeblood. It is our breadbasket. And we have our own Indigenous laws for stewarding our territories and resources sustainably. In 2022, the Kitasoo Nation declared Kitasoo Bay a marine protected area. Kitasoo Bay is a sacred area in the heart of Kitasoo traditional territory. Significant to the community's health, culture, and economy.
That was super powerful. I mean, hereditary chiefs to get up and designate a protected area under their authority, with the mandate with watchmen to get out there and monitor and enforce.
Recognizing the nation's long-standing stewardship authority, the BC government has now designated Kitasoo and Newholt Guardian Watchmen with Park Ranger authority.
We've always governed ourselves, and I think we've always had rules and laws that we've always lived by to conserve and make sure that there's healthy stocks there. I think this is an opportunity for First Nations to implement some of those Indigenous laws or rules around conservation. A bit more of a holistic view of management and not just waiting for a species until it's in trouble. It's a proactive measure, setting aside areas to protect multiple species. I think that's going to again protect all of our values and our interests in those ecological and sensitive areas. So I think it's a win-win for everyone and see good coming out of all of it.
We're continually finding ways to gather the information using modern-day science and modern-day techniques in conjunction with our traditional law to look after our territory, look after our resources. We have many programs, Guardian Watchman programs, science programs, monitoring programs. We have all the tools to make sure that the resources that we depend on, the fish, the seaweed, the herring eggs, the halibut, and all those things thrive to make sure that those salmon come back every year to the streams and that we are able to maintain a living in our territories.
It's not just about protecting everything. It's not just about developing everything. It's about a balance. And what governs that essentially is our culture and our way of life.
These territories and the bounty that exists within them sustained our people for thousands of years. So we know it can provide if it's managed and taken care for well. It's actually incumbent upon us as First Nations leaders to bring that balance to the environmentalists, to bring that balance to the industry and make sure that they understand that there's a long-term game plan here. It's not about the next quarter profits or the next fundraising campaign. This is about a long-term plan to bring sustainability back to our communities as it existed before contact.
We're all just trying to feed our families. We're all just trying to feed our people. We're all just trying to make a living in this world, and that can be tough to do. And so we need to do what we can to protect it for not just Indigenous communities, but for every British Columbian, because we all live on this coast, for every Canadian, for everybody on this globe. We need to do our part to contribute to a healthier ocean.
When I think about this coast, I think what is this opportunity in this moment of time? It's the only thing that I can address in my role. And where do we find the wisdom and the intelligence and the courage to do things in a new way, in a more sustainable way? And then I think of the relationship of those coastal First Nations leaders, and then I'm very much at ease. It's the right path. There's no question in my mind. And we are a very, very motivated government to see this done.
Well, I will, of course, be seeking long-term funding for the governance and the implementation and operations of the network. There is a recognition that this hasn't been easy. It's been really a testament to human dedication to an important cause. And so I am just extremely grateful to those from all of the parties that have worked together to get to where we are today. And I have a lot of confidence that this collaboration, cooperation, and shared vision will continue right to through to the final stages of this network.
As First Nations, our path forward begins with our responsibility to safeguard and to care for our lands and waters on everyone's behalf. This requires sharing of responsibilities, resources, and management. And this requires unprecedented cooperation among all three government partners: First Nations, BC, and Canada. Thank you for taking the time to learn about our work to establish the Marine Protected Area Network for the Great Bear Sea.